All right, and then for the kind of big announcement today, and this is what we'll be talking about for the remainder of the session, is Particleworks version 7.2 has been officially released, and this is kind of a major release, even though it's a point release. For Prometech, this is a major release. Oh, and one thing I wanted to mention, so the announcement emails went out this morning. So in our system, we have kind of notes on who should be getting product announcements. So it should have gone to your IT folks. You may or may not have received those emails. But if you did, and there were people on that CC list who either maybe were missing or were there but don't need to be sure to let us know, and we can keep those lists up to date so that people are getting the relevant announcements. So I'm going to do kind of an overview of features, and then we'll jump into a couple of them in more detail. And I'm sure over the next few months, we'll dive into more of these as we go on. So a couple of big announcements related to the FVM and CHD solvers. So in previous versions, the multi-GPU support didn't work for those two solvers, but now we do have support for multi-GPU. For some of the larger models, I think that's going to make a pretty large difference. There's also steady state solvers, and this is one that I know we'll dig into in the future. But for some cases where you can do you can pre-compute the FVM state, or if you just want to do a thermal analysis as like a steady state, secondary analysis, that's something that's now supported. And there's also additional FVM boundary conditions. There's a Lattice Boltzmann solver that's currently in beta. This is sort of a different approach to doing what you could previously do with the FVM solver. So this is a faster solver, supports a few different options versus the FVM solver. And like I mentioned, it's in beta right now, so definitely worth trying out. But as it's in beta, things may change in the future. There's a pressure boundary condition that Chris is going to be talking about, so I won't dive into any detail. So I have more slides on a lot of these. But first I did want to point out one kind of convenience thing is in the standard output that you get for simulations. In previous releases, they made the times more useful by breaking out hours, minutes, seconds, and now they've added commas to the number of particles in the simulation. Makes it a lot easier to kind of figure out how big your model is without manually figuring out where you are. All right, so let me dive into a tad more detail on the FVM and CHD solvers. So I mentioned the multi-GPU support. One thing I did want to mention, this is something that, by the time it's actually relevant, it'll probably have been forgotten, but I wanted to at least make a mental note here. When you're using multi-GPU for the FVM solvers or the CHD solvers, the domain decomposition, it's an advanced option in like the advanced option section. It's always set to the default option. That's something that we pretty much never change, but this does need to be changed for using this in multi-GPU mode. So you can either split it in the X, Y, or Z direction, and you have to select one of those rather than default. There's been general performance and stability improvements for the solvers. Like I mentioned, there's new boundary conditions. So one of those is that you can set the slip condition for each geometry individually. And we kind of note that in this image right here. So for each body, you can go in and select whether it's slip or no slip or free slip. You can also select a pressure boundary condition versus just a velocity boundary condition. And like I mentioned, the steady state modes for both the FVM and CHD solvers. Then the Lattice Boltzmann method. So I'm not going to go into a tremendous amount of detail as this is still kind of a work in progress. One of the big things with this method versus FVM is that it supports grid refinement zones. So you have a little bit more customizability or control as far as where you're getting resolution in the model. This is a screenshot from the tutorial that ships with 7.2. So if you're interested in this kind of work, definitely recommend checking out the tutorial and getting a feel for some of the options related to the new solver. All right, next, so this will only be kind of relevant for a handful of customers, I think, but worth at least mentioning. So RecurDyn V9R5, this added the ability to do thermal simulations with their flexible bodies. So RecurDyn is a multi-body dynamics tool, and it's sort of, without going into detail, it has like an embedded FE solver, um, and they added the ability to do thermal simulations on those FE bodies. So now Particleworks and RecurDyn can trade thermal information instead of just the position and pressure information that used to be supported. And then last thing I wanted to highlight is some thermal improvements. So I'll kind of go in reverse order. In the past, when you had connected outflows and inflows, so particles pass through an outflow and then are injected through an inflow somewhere else, sort of representing maybe a pumping system or something like that. Now the temperature is conserved when a particle passes through. So adds a level of fidelity to those types of simulations. Another option that they've added is for when you're doing a thermal simulation. In the past, it would use a conduction equation to calculate energy transfer to or from a particle with a wall. Now you can use the heat transfer coefficient the Particleworks calculates separately. You can use that instead of the existing conduction equation. All right, so that gives kind of a high-level overview. You'll see in the installer folder that was sent out, there's a full release notes list there. Definitely worth checking out, and then playing around with some of the new features as your IT makes it available for install.